Okay, so I'll begin. So let me, okay, so this time I'm going to try this whiteboard. Let's see how it will work. So this is going to be a course on cosmology. Which is essentially a study of the history of the universe. And the reference that I'll follow, I mean, I'll follow in the content, but not quite in the order, okay, is the Weinberg's book on cosmology. So before I actually begin the course, I'll first set some conventions. So the conventions that I'll be using, okay, let me describe the convention. So first of all, I'll use units in which I'll set the h bar equal to 1, c equal to 1, and then the Newton's constant g equal to 1, but this is not always, okay? Not always. Okay, but sometimes. If we do set these units, okay, then of course everything is dimensionless. But in that case, once you get some number, okay, everything is dimensionless. Suppose you have gotten some number, okay, you may ask how to translate it to the ordinary units. Okay? So for this, it's useful to know what the units of these natural units that I have used, what the natural units are in terms of the units that you are familiar with. Okay? And so those are captured in this constant. So m Planck, this is the unit of mass. Okay? Which means that we write m Planck as h bar to the a, c to the b, g to the say, k. Okay? And then we fix a, b, and c, a, b, and k by saying that this should have the dimension of mass. Okay, so that uniquely fixes a, b, and k. Okay? And then you can ask what is its actual value, okay, in terms of the units that you're familiar with when you substitute the values of h bar, c, and g. And this is, I'll write in terms of energy. This is 1.22 times 10 to the 19 GeV. Okay, this is in energy per c square if you want to convert it to mass, okay, where c is the velocity of light. Okay. Similarly, the unit of length is what we call the Planck length or L Planck, okay, which can again be found by the same procedure. Okay. And that is 1.62 times 10 to the minus 33 centimeter. This is unit of length. And then finally, the unit of time, T Planck, will be 8.62 times 10 to the minus 44 second. Okay. And I'll leave it as an exercise for you to work this out. Okay, the procedure is straightforward. As I said, you just take the general form, determine A, B, K by dimensional analysis, and substitute the values of H bar, C, and G in known units. Okay. Another constant that will be useful for us is the Boltzmann's constant. This also sometimes will set equal to 1. Okay, but let me just say what the value is. Boltzmann constant, which I'll denote by KB, is, I think I might have made a mistake somewhere in the copying, but you should be able to check this. 10 to minus 5 electron volt per Kelvin. Okay, this one I'm not quite sure, but I'll check this. Now, there are also another set of units that sometimes one uses. So sometimes one uses reduced Planck unit. One uses reduced Planck unit. And there we set h bar equal to 1, c equal to 1, and 8 pi g equal to 1. Okay, so this means that when you write a formula like this, instead of using g, you will write 8 pi g to the power k. And then you can work out what the reduced units will be. Okay, here. Okay, there'll be of the same order, but they'll differ by some factors. Okay, other questions? Next, I'll describe the Riemann tensor convention, because this, again, different books uses different conventions. So I'll use R mu rho sigma. The definition will be gamma is the standard Christoffel symbol. The Ricci R nu sigma will be the contraction of the indices mu and rho. So R mu mu sigma. The scalar curvature will be G nu sigma R nu sigma. And in this convention, the Einstein's equation takes the form R mu nu minus half R G mu nu is equal to 8 pi G T mu nu. Okay, so this will be the convention that will be following. So the first few lectures of this course will be a repetition of what you have already learned in the course of general relativity. Okay, the last part of general relativity course. But I'll go through it anyway quickly. Okay, so that we follow the same conventions. Okay, and the lectures are self-contained. Okay. So as I said, the universe, it's a cosmology is a study of the universe, but the universe, of course, is complicated object. So universe is complicated. Okay. So one needs some simplifying assumptions. And the assumptions that we'll be making is that the universe is homogeneous and isotropic. And isotropic. And I'll try to explain in more detail what exactly this means. Are there questions? Okay. So let me now state the assumption a little better. So the assumption is that there is a preferred choice of time, is a preferred choice of time coordinate which I'll call the cosmic time, such that at any time t, universe, or maybe I should say the metric, looks the same everywhere and in all directions. Okay. And this is somewhat loose statement, looks the same. Okay, this I'll try to make clear later. Okay, what exactly this means. Okay. But before I do that, let me just say that initially, when the subjects first started, initially this was taken as a simplifying assumption, as an assumption. To simplify analysis. Now we know it's true. True when we study average properties, when we study average properties over large distances. Over large distances. Okay. Now, how large is large? Okay. Experimentally, one finds that it's of the order of 250 million light years. Okay. That if you look at distance scales above that, okay, above 250 times 10 to the 6 light years, okay, then roughly the average properties of the universe looks the same. Okay, so the average metric looks the same everywhere and in all directions. Okay. And this is a good time also to introduce a new unit of length, parsec. Okay. This is about, let me see, I think it's about 3.826 light years, 3.26 light years, okay, which in conventional units is 3.086 times 10 to the 13 kilometer. Okay, are there questions? Okay. So now let me be more specific. Okay. So what do we mean when we say that universe looks the same everywhere and in all directions. Okay, we want to make this a little more specific. Okay. So for this, we have to recall some properties of general coordinate transformation. So a general coordinate transformation takes the following form. You start with the coordinate x mu and define new coordinates x tilde mu, which is some function of x. Okay, so x stands for x0, x1, x2, x3, all four coordinates. Okay. The inverse transformation is x mu is some other function h mu of x tilde. And we know that g tilde mu nu of x tilde is given by this formula. Okay, and you can invert this to write g also in terms of g tilde. Okay, the inverse transformation. So this is a general coordinate transformation. Okay. Now we'll call a transformation an isometry. So a transformation is called an isometry if g tilde mu nu okay. Notice that the arguments are the same. Okay. So basically what it is saying is that after coordinate transformation, typically g tilde mu nu looks like a different function. Okay. But if the new function happens to be the same as the old function, okay, then you call this an isometry. Is this point clear?
Hello, sir.
Yes, go ahead, please.
So the functional form will remain the same, right?
Yes, exactly. That's right. Okay. So for example, if you start with a metric like d theta squared plus sine squared theta d phi squared, okay, then if you make a appropriate transformation, say theta tilde, some function of theta phi, and phi tilde, some other function, say f1 of theta phi, then the metric in this new coordinate system, the old metric in this new coordinate system should look the same, namely d theta tilde squared plus sine squared theta tilde d phi tilde squared. Then we'll call this an isometry. Okay, so the metric form remains the same. Functional form remains the same. Okay, any other question? Okay. So with this, I can now make these notions more precise. So homogeneity, what does it mean by homogeneity? So when you say that the universe is homogeneous, this means that given two space-time points, say given any two space-time points, we'll call tx1 and tx2, with same time coordinate, there, try to move this away. is an isometry. So the isometry takes the form t tilde equal to t. Okay, so time coordinate doesn't change. X tilde I equal to some fi of tx. Xi is opposite, so hi of tx tilde, such that the following holds. Namely, fi of t x1 is equal to x2. Okay, so this means what? That this means that given any two space-time points, okay, at fixed time slice, okay, you should be able to find a general coordinate transformation, okay, that leaves the form of the metric unchanged. That's what we mean by it's an isometry. Okay, and that maps the point x1 to the point x2. So this is precisely what one would mean by saying that the space-time is homogeneous, not that there is spatial homogeneity, that you should have an isometry that moves you from any point on a given time slice to any other point. Is this statement clear? So this will be our definition of homogeneity. Now I'm going to define isotropy. Okay. So here it says the following: given a space-time point t x naught and another pair of points tx1 and tx2 at equal geodesic distance from tx naught, there is an isometry Again, isometry will take this of the form t tilde equal to t, okay, and x tilde I. Okay, let's use some other symbol now. Okay, maybe phi I tx. The reverse is xi. Let's say xi I tx tilde. But the property that it should have is that such that, okay, phi I tx naught is equal to x naught I, and phi I of tx1 equal to x2I. Okay, which basically is saying that the phi I, okay, should, that this particular isometry, so this is first of all an isometry, that means the metric should preserve its form, okay, and it should have the property that it keeps the point x naught fixed, okay, and moves x1 to x2. So intuitively we can see why this is an isometry, or why this refers to isotropy, because it says that the space-time should look the same in all directions. So you fix a point, okay, and you look at different directions. Okay, you see 2 points at equal distance in 2 different directions, okay, and then in order that the metric looks the same in all directions, there must be an isometry that moves those 2 points to each other. without changing the original point where you are sitting. So this is the technical definition of what we mean by homogeneous and isotropic space. Is this clear? Are there questions?
Sir,
Yes, go ahead, please.
sir, could you please explain the middle one, like FIT x1 equals to x2 bar? This one.
Yeah, so this basically says that the transformation is such that it takes x1 to x2. Sorry, this is, maybe I should put an index I here, if that is causing confusion. That the image of the point x1 is x2, right? You think of this as a just translation, right? In space translation, I mean, that's the simplest example. If you have flat space, then it's homogeneous. And what we mean by homogeneous is that there is a transformation, the simple translation. Okay, there x2 will be x1 plus a, which moves any point to any other point. Now, this is a more general definition that the transformation that we are using need not be the simple translation. Right? It can be a complicated function, as long as it achieves this, that it takes the point x1 and gives you back x2. And this should hold for any pair of points. Now, it doesn't mean that the Fi will remain the same. Of course, if you have to take two different points, okay, you may need different amounts of translation to relate them. But given 2 points, you should be able to find a transformation that preserves a metric and that takes you from the first point to the second point.
Okay, sir.
And this is a somewhat more complicated version of this. Okay, this is translational symmetry, and this is the generalization of rotational symmetry. Is this okay?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Any other question? Okay. So now I'll give a result without actually proving it. Okay, and you might have seen this is your general relativity course, but otherwise you just have to assume it. Or maybe one more point I should have said is, you see here that these transformations that we are taking, okay, are at fixed time slice, right? T we are not changing, okay? And that's because universe is only assumed to be spatially homogeneous and spatially isotropic, okay? But it's not homogeneous under time translation, okay, or a general Lorentz transformation that mixes space and time. Okay? So homogeneity and isotropy of the universe refers to only along the spatial directions. Okay? And that's the reason why you need a space, that this can only hold for a spatial choice of time, right? And that's what you are calling the cosmic time. Okay? This again is an assumption at present, okay, but later on we'll see how to justify this. What is the origin of the existence of a cosmic time, or what is the origin of having a homogeneous and isotropic universe? Okay, right now we just proceed with this assumption, okay, and the observation that it seems to be true over large scales. Okay, so now I give some results. And that's the following, that by a suitable choice of coordinates, okay, where d omega square, this is a notation I'll be using often, is d theta square plus sine square theta d phi square, and k takes value 0 or plus minus 1. Okay. So this is what is called the FRW metric. Okay, Friedman Robertson Walker metric. So this I'll assume without proving, but I'll try to explain where they come from. Okay. So first, let's consider the k equal to 0. Okay, this of course is this means that the spatial metric is flat. Okay, so ds3 square. Okay, ds3 square. So this part of the metric, let's call ds3 square the spatial metric. Okay. So ds3 square is dr square plus r square d omega square, which you can just write as dx1 square. This is a polar coordinate. So you can go to the Cartesian coordinate to write this as dx1 square plus dx2 square plus dx3 square. Okay. And this, of course, the homogeneity and isotropy is clear. Okay. The transformation that generates homogeneity, for example, is just space translation x to x plus a. Right? Given any 2 points, you can always find a translation that takes you from one to the other, okay, without changing the metric. Okay. And the isotropy, okay, is generated by rotation. Right? So take any point to show that the metric there is an isometry that preserves that point, that keeps that point fixed, and it maps equal distance points to each other. You just use a rotation around that point. Okay, and that of course preserves a metric, and it generates isotropy. Okay. So this part is more or less straightforward.
There is a of t square, right? You have not written that.
Pardon?
There is a as a function of t square dr square, but we have written only.
So, okay, this is my definition of ds3 square.
Okay.
Just after you have taken factored out a of t square.
Okay.
So if this is homogeneous, right, and because the translation is independent of time,
Yes.
it doesn't matter that there's an a of t square. Is that point clear?
Yes.
Okay, so essentially what let me do, let me write it a little more. Okay, so the homogeneity transformation is x tilde I is xi plus ai, right? And the isotropy x tilde I minus x naught I is r ij times xj minus x naught j. Okay, but this is a rotation matrix. Okay, so this you can easily check that this preserves a metric, and this does what you want to do. Okay, this can move between any 2 points, and this leaves the point x naught fixed, right? Because if xj is equal to x naught j, then x tilde is equal to x naught I. It leaves the point x naught fixed, and it moves points around it. Okay, equal distance points, it moves into each other. Any other question? Okay, so let me do now the k equal to 1 case. Here, the claim is that this, in this case, ds3 square, which is dr square over 1 minus r square plus r square d omega square. This is a metric on a unit 3 sphere. Okay, so what do you mean by unit 3 sphere? Okay, so let's consider the following metric. Subject to the condition that x square plus y square plus z square plus w square equal to 1. Okay, so even though it looks like it has 4 coordinates, there is one constant. So this is really a 3-dimensional space. Okay. So here we can first of all eliminate one of the variables in terms of the others. So we'll parameterize it, okay, in terms of 3 independent coordinates as follows. So I'll write w equal to cos psi, then z equal to sin psi cos theta, x as sin psi sin theta cos phi, and y as sin psi sin theta sin phi. Okay. So first a simple exercise to check that x square plus y square plus z square plus w square is automatically 1. Okay. So this basically means that theta, phi, and psi label are the independent parameters that label this space. Okay. A slightly more non-trivial exercise, okay, is to check, to calculate ds square. So basically to calculate ds square, you have to express each of these dx, dy, dz, dw in terms of differentials d psi, d theta, and d phi, okay, and then square them and add them. And this is given by d psi square plus sine square psi times d theta square plus sine square theta d phi square. Okay, and then we can make one more change of variable. Okay, I define r as sine psi. So in that case, d psi square is dr square over 1 minus r square. Okay, you can, dr square is cos square psi d psi square, d psi square, right? And 1 minus r square is cos square psi in the denominator using this. So the cos square psi cancels and this becomes d psi square. Okay, so this allows us to write ds, this is ds3 square, ds3 square as dr square over 1 minus r square plus r square. Okay, and this is what we have been calling d omega square. Okay, so that's exactly this. Okay, so the k equal to one case represents the metric on a unit sphere. Is this clear? And the isometry in this case is SO4 rotation x, y, z, w. Or let me say x tilde, y tilde, z tilde, w tilde. The transform coordinates is r times x, y, z, w. Okay, but r is a 4x4 matrix satisfying r transpose r equal to identity. Okay, so this is SO4. Okay, and you can easily check that using this SO4 isometry, we can prove, can be used to prove homogeneity and isotropy. So namely, to prove homogeneity, for example, you have to show that given any 2 points, x, y, z, w, and say x1, y1, z1, w1, and x2, y2, z2, w2, both lying on a unit sphere, there is a appropriate rotation, SO4 rotation, that takes you from one to the other. This should be intuitively obvious, right? From unit 2 sphere, it's clear. If given a point on any 2 points on a 2 sphere, you can always find a rotation that takes you from one to the other. For the 3 sphere, it's also more or less straightforward to prove this. To prove isotropy, right? Isotropy means that given one point, x0, and 2 other points, x1, x2 nearby, at equal distance, you should be able to find a transformation that takes you from x1 to x2 and keeps x0 unchanged. And that basically corresponds to a particular rotation, okay, particular SO4 transformation that leaves a given point x naught fixed and moves the other two to each other. Okay, and you can again explicitly check that this can always be done given any pair, any 3 points x0, x1, and x2, with the property that x1 and x2 are at this equal geodesic distance from x0. So this is the second homogeneous and isotropic space. Are there questions?
Sir, to prove this isometropy, you are saying that the 2 points should be equal from this fixed point, right? So,
Yes.
so why these two geodesic distance should be equal by which we can?
Oh, because if the geodesic distances are not equal,
yeah,
then you cannot find such a transformation, right? Let's consider two spheres.
yes,
Imagine that your x0 is your north pole,
yeah,
and x1 and x2 are two arbitrary points.
okay,
Now we want to find a transformation that leaves the north pole fixed
yeah,
and takes x1 to x2,
okay,
right? That is not possible, right? You can easily imagine if you keep the north pole fixed, that means what? You can only allow rotation about the z-axis, right?
yeah,
And in that case, given two arbitrary points, right? One at theta 1 and other one at theta 2, you cannot change one to the other.
okay,
So the first condition is important, that you have to be able to, that the isometry should be such that it keeps the point x0 unchanged.
okay,
Otherwise, it's a statement of homogeneity, right? Homogeneity means that there is no other constant, that you should be able to find an isometry that takes one point to another, right? That can always be done on a sphere. But once you impose this additional condition that one point has to be fixed, then the other two have to be at the same geodesic distance from the fixed point.
okay, okay.
Is this clear? Any other question? Okay, so now let me give the third example. Okay, the k equal to -1 case. In this case, ds3 square is dr square over 1 plus r square plus r square d omega square. Okay. So this is in fact one will show that it's what is called a hyperbolic space. Okay. So here you again introduce 4 coordinates, okay, ds square as dx square plus dy square plus dz square minus dw square. Okay. The condition that he imposed is w square minus x square minus y square minus z square equal to 1. Okay. So this is a hyperbolic space. Okay. Again, we have 4 coordinates, but 1 condition. So this is really a 3-dimensional space. And you can solve it by the following. So I take w equal to cos hyperbolic. This time it's cos hyperbolic psi. That's the only difference. Okay. Z will be sine hyperbolic psi cos theta. X is sine hyperbolic psi sine theta cos phi. And y is sine hyperbolic psi sine theta sine phi. Okay. You can easily check that these automatically satisfy this equation. Okay. And then once you put this is ds3 square, once you substitute and calculate ds3 square, you get this to be d psi square plus sine hyperbolic square psi times d omega square. Okay, d omega square is again d theta square plus sine square theta d phi square. Okay. And now the change of variable that you make is r equal to sine hyperbolic psi, and this gives ds3 square as dr square over 1 plus r square. Right? You see 1 plus r square is cos hyperbolic psi, right? and dr square is cos hyperbolic square d psi square. So this cancel and get back d psi square. And then this part sine hyperbolic psi is just r. So you get r square d omega square.
So the four-dimensional metric is still Euclidean, right?
Yes, indeed, it is Euclidean. The four-dimensional metric is Euclidean. You are considering a three-dimensional metric.
No, in the ds3 square you have written minus dw square.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So the point is, this looks like a non-Euclidean metric, right? But once you impose this condition, then this becomes a Euclidean metric. So this is, in terms of independent variable, you can see here, right? Here there is a minus sign. So three-dimensional metric is Euclidean. So it's a three-dimensional space embedded in a four-dimensional Lorentzian space. But after you have embedded it, it becomes a Euclidean space.
Okay.
It's not, I mean, the fact that such things can be done is shouldn't perhaps surprise you. Imagine that you take the usual Minkowski space, right? Minkowski space time, and consider the t equal to 0 hypersurface. That is Euclidean, right? So it is possible to embed fully Euclidean surfaces inside a fully Euclidean space inside a higher dimensional Lorentzian space, and that's what we are doing here. I mean, a priori, it was not guaranteed that this space will turn out to be Euclidean, but once you actually work it out, okay, you explicitly see that indeed this metric is fully Euclidean. Is this clear?
Yeah, I thought, I mean, had we taken this ds3 square Euclidean metric, then we could get something that would be like a three-sphere.
Yeah, that will be like a three-sphere. See, then you can, if you use plus sign here and if you use this, right, then the isometry will be lost.
Yeah, okay.
Right? Because it's important that you use the same metric. I mean, in the previous case, for example, I mean, we couldn't have changed the sign anywhere, right? I mean, once you have taken this to be positive, the fact that there is this SO4 isometry, SO4 isometry, I said here. The fact that this is an isometry relies on two facts. Okay? One is that the metric is invariant under that, but also that the constraint is invariant, right? So the same isometry must both preserve the constant as well as the metric. And it's the same reason why here, for example, I had to do it this way. That, I mean, I could have made an overall change of sign. Okay, I could have taken this to be minus w square plus x square plus y square plus z square equal to 1. That will be a defined space. That will not be Euclidean.
Yeah, understood. And also, is this result the same for more than 3 dimensions, or is it different?
No, it's the same for more than 3 dimensions. In fact, one can show that in general dimension, there are only 3 homogeneous anisotropic metric, and these are these 3. If you use Euclidean signature, okay, for Euclidean signature, you keep adding more plus signs here and more minus signs here, but otherwise it's exactly these 3. So this is the general result. Okay, proof of that is more complicated. Okay, the proof that these are homogeneous and isotropic metric is reasonably simple because you just explicitly construct the isometry and you verify that given 2 points, you can always find a transformation that takes one to the other, or that given 2 points and equal geodesic distance from the third one, there is always an isometry that takes you from one to the other. But the proof that these are the only 3, okay, that's more complicated. Is this clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I should have said that when I said these are the only 3, okay, you could have taken quotients of this by some discrete rule. Okay, it's like instead of flat space, okay, we could have tried to take some quotient. Okay, okay, even in that case, I have a feeling that isotropy will not work. Yeah, so I think if you want, I mean, if you take a flat space, for example, you can make it into a torus. Okay, by periodically identifying certain directions. Locally, the metric will look isotropic, but the global structure will not be isotropic. Right. So I think these are the only three that are really homogeneous and isotropic.
What did you just say? If you make the flat space into a torus.
Yeah, take the case k equal to 0, right?
Yeah.
And imagine that the metric remains the same, except that certain directions are periodically identified, right? That the x1 direction is periodic with period L1, x2 direction is periodic with period L2, and x3 direction is periodic with period L3, right?
Typically, that identification is done with compact spaces, right?
Yeah, so you are making it into a compact space.
Like the entirety of Minkowski space.
No, just the spatial slice.
Yeah, but that is of infinite expanse without any boundary.
How do you know?
What?
Well, this is not, sphere is not infinite expanse, no? This certainly has a boundary. 3 sphere. So don't take it for granted that our space is of infinite extent.
Okay.
Right? So it could be a finite expanse, right? But if you try to make periodic identification here, what will not be true is it will not be isotropic globally.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's certainly, I mean, intuitively you can see, right? I mean, if you have a periodic identification, then a generic rotation will not preserve that periodicity.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the compactness is not an argument, because you could be having a spatial slice which is compact. Okay, all we can say at present is that if it's compact, size must be very large, which we haven't observed so far. Are there any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to ask, like, as a rule, like demonstrating these things is still fine. Like going to a higher dimension and choosing an appropriate constraint to give us a lower dimensional surface.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this thing is like, okay, reasonable mathematically speaking, but in general, like doing physics in higher dimensions, is that justified?
No, you don't have to do physics in higher dimensions. This is just to describe a two sphere, right? You can write it as an equation in 3 dimensions. But
Yeah.
2 sphere is a 2-dimensional space intrinsically, right? You don't ever have to talk about 3 dimensions to talk about a 2 sphere.
Yeah, exactly. And that is why it feels justified to demonstrate the symmetries and all.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So this is the metric, right? This is fictitious. I mean, these 4 coordinates don't exist.
Yeah.
Right. We are just describing this as an embedding space, as an embedding, but you can certainly perfectly well live with this. And all the homogeneity and isotropy transformations, right? You can write purely in terms of these coordinates, r theta phi, and not talking about x, y, z, w. It's easier to visualize if you use these embedding coordinates.
Yeah.
Any other question? Okay, so here, let me give the isometric transformation. So the isometries in this case are SO3, 1. Which basically sends x, y, z, w. So this is r times x, y, z, w. But r now satisfies r transpose, and then this matrix I3. I3 is 3 by 3 identity matrix, Here there's a -1. R is I3 0 0 -1. Okay. So this is SO3, 1, okay, with the 3 plus 1 dimensional Lorentz group. So this is just as a group structure. This is not a Lorentz transformation because the symmetry is acting totally inside the space directions. Okay. But using this isometry, SO3, 1, we can again prove homogeneity and isotropy. Okay. For example, homogeneity, right? How do you prove this? So homogeneity means that given two points, x, y, z, w, say x1, y1, z1, w1, and x2, y2, z2, w2, both satisfying this condition over here, there should be Lorentz transformation that takes you from one to the other. Okay, and that I think you are familiar with. I should have said here one point. I should have emphasized that you see this has two components, right? Just all hyperbola have two components. So this gives W equal to plus or minus square root of 1 plus x square plus y square plus z square. Okay. And you have to choose only one branch, right? Either plus or minus, it doesn't matter which one you choose. So you have to look at a connected component, right? You don't use both branches. And once you use that, then it's clear that you can always find a Lorentz transformation that takes any vector of length 1 to any other vector of length 1. Okay, now let's come to the present universe. Okay. So the present universe present universe is almost flat. And one can ask, how is it consistent? With FRW metric that we introduced. Okay. So FRW metric, let me remind you again, is ds square is minus dt square plus at square times dr square over 1 minus k r square plus r square d omega square. Okay. So let's define. Okay. So now I'll introduce some notation again. So T naught is today's time. Okay. And let's define A naught as A of T naught. Okay, that's the, so A is called the scale factor. So A naught is the value of the scale factor today. Okay. So in that case, we can rewrite this. Okay, I'll just take out the factor of A naught and write this as ds square as minus dt square plus A naught square lambda t square okay, where lambda t is A of t by A naught. Okay, so by definition, lambda of T naught is 1. Okay. So now let's define a coordinate rho, which is A naught times R. Okay. And in terms of this coordinate, I can write ds square as minus dt square plus lambda t square. Then here you have d rho square over 1 minus k rho square over A naught square plus rho square d omega square. Is this clear? So what I have done here is that I have taken this A naught inside, right? So A naught times R I am calling rho, So this becomes d rho square. A naught times r is rho. So this becomes rho square d omega square. And the denominator 1 minus k r square, I write as 1 minus k times rho square over a naught square. And now we see that we can make this almost flat. Okay. So if lambda t is slowly varying, and a naught is large, then ds square is so if lambda t is slowly varying, lambda t naught is today 1, right? If it's slowly varying, then it's almost 1. So ds square minus dt square plus, you see, if a naught is large, then this term is small. So I can write this as d rho square plus rho square d omega square. But this, of course, is just a normal flat metric written in the polar coordinates. So I can write this as dx1 square plus dx2 square plus dx3 square, okay, which is a flat metric. Okay. So what this is saying is that if the FRW metric has to represent our universe that is known today, okay, then it must be that lambda is slowly varying and a naught is large. Okay. So these are the two conditions that we learn. But now let's ask, okay, what does the experiment tell us? So experiment today is consistent with a naught equal to infinity, okay, which means that there is no evidence so far, okay, that a naught is any different from infinity. Okay, it could be that means it's larger than certain whatever experiments have been able to determine. Okay. So if we now write the FRW metric again, ds square is minus dt square plus lambda t square d rho square over what this is saying is that k is 0, can be taken to be 0 for all practical purpose. Okay, taking a naught to be infinity is the same as saying that k can be taken to be 0. Okay, so whether k is 1, minus 1 or 0 makes no difference if a naught is large enough. So often it's useful to work with k equal to 0. Okay. So for most of the calculations that we'll be performing, we'll take k equal to 0, okay, and proceed. Okay. But one should keep in mind that that's an approximation. Okay. In general, there could have been a very, very large a naught. But for practical calculations, we can just set k equal to 0. On the other hand, lambda t has been observed to vary with time. Okay. So let me describe how it is observed. Again, I'm sure you have learned it in the GR course, but let me do this anyway. Okay. So we'll now try to describe the physical significance of lambda t. Okay, and that will also tell us how exactly it is observed. Okay. So let's consider Then let's suppose there is a source at the point A at time t1, and the light emitted from that source reaches us at time t0, because this is us. So this is us. Okay, this is present time. And study its consequence. Okay, what it means, what it implies. So first, so let me write it again. So T1A is the source, and T2B is the observer. Now, because of the homogeneity, we can take B to be anywhere that we like, to be at r equal to 0. Okay. And if you take it to be r equal to 0, I can, theta and phi, it doesn't matter. I can take theta and phi to be 0 also. Then you can use isotropy still. Okay, that means we can now still rotate around the origin. Isotropy tells us that we can take A to be at r equal to r1 and theta and phi equal to 0. Okay, you can basically rotate the theta and phi coordinate to set it equal to 0. R, of course, you cannot change. So say at r equal to r1. Is this clear what you are doing? So light travels from the initial point Ta to the final point T2B, T1A to the final point. Sorry, this is T1. I should have had a comma here. T1A to the final point T2B. Okay. So light, of course, travels along geodesic. So light travels along null geodesic. Okay, so the geodesic equation is d2x mu d tau square plus gamma mu rho and because it's a null geodesic, you also have this condition that g mu nu dx mu d tau dx nu d tau should be 0. Tau here is not a proper time but the affine parameter. Okay, because proper time, of course, is 0 along the null along geodesics, the affine parameter. Okay. And I leave it as an exercise to show that the path lies along theta equal to 0, phi equal to 0. Okay. Well, phi, of course, once theta is 0, then phi doesn't matter, right? Because the metric has sine square theta d phi square, right? So just like if you're at the North Pole, then the polar angle doesn't matter. The azimuthal angle doesn't matter. Anyway, so what this is saying is that if we have a null geodesic that connects the point r equal to r1, theta equal to 0, phi equal to 0, to r equal to 0, theta and phi 0. Okay, this is at T1, this is at T0. Okay. Then that null geodesic must lie along the theta equal to 0, phi equal to 0 line. It should be more or less clear by symmetry, right? Because if if theta was changing, right, then which direction will it change? So it follows from symmetry, but you can also prove this by looking at a geodesic equation. Okay, basically to show that theta equal to constant and phi equal to constant satisfies this automatically. And because initial and final condition tells you theta and phi are the same, okay, that both are 0, this will preserve that. So let's proceed by assuming this, that the null geodesic lies around theta equal to 0, phi equal to 0. And in that case, we can now use this condition that ds square is 0, 0 along null geodesic, to show that minus dt square plus a of t square times dr square over 1 minus kr square must be 0. Okay, because d theta and d phi are 0 along the path, right? D phi equal to 0, d theta equal to 0 along the path. Okay, so this tells us that integral t1 to t0, okay, it starts at t1, ends at t0, dt over a of t is plus or minus integral r1 to 0 dr over square root of 1 minus kr square. And in this case, okay, because t1 is less than t0, right, the left hand side is positive. Okay, this integral, okay, is negative because it's running from r1 to 0. Okay, so that basically tells us that you have to choose the minus sign. Okay, this is the correct sign. And then you can also write this as integral 0 to r1 dr over square root of 1 minus kr square. Is this clear? Okay, so now suppose the same source B, okay, emits another light ray at time t1 plus delta t1. Okay, so suppose light emitted from t1 plus delta t1 B reaches t0 plus delta t0 A. Okay, that it starts at t1 plus delta t1 and reaches A at t0 plus delta t0. Okay, so this then will give a similar equation, okay, as this one, okay, except that t1 will be replaced by t1 plus delta t1 and t0 will be replaced by t0 plus delta t0. This side will not change because it's starting at the same spatial points. So we'll get integral t1 plus delta t1 to t0 plus delta t0 dt over a of t is integral 0 to r1 dr over square root 1 minus kr square. Okay. And now let's take the difference. Okay, let's take the difference between this equation and this equation. The right hand side cancels. Okay. So right hand side is 0. Okay. On the left hand side, you see the integral now can be written. So the t1 to t0 integral cancels. So you have an integral from t0 to t0 plus delta t0. Okay. And you have to subtract from there an integral from t1 to t1 plus delta t1. So this tells us basically that delta t0 over a t0 minus delta t1 over a t1 is 0. Is this clear? I'm simply subtracting this from this. Okay. The right hand side cancels. The left hand side only gets contribution from the end points. Okay. And because delta t0 and delta t1 we are taking to be small, okay, we are not really doing the integral. You are just replacing this by delta t0 over a of t0 and delta t1 by a of t1. Any question? Okay. So let me write this again. So we had delta T naught over A of T naught as delta T1, sorry. So this basically tells us the delta T naught is delta T1 over lambda T1. Remember the lambda of T is A of T over A of T naught. So there is the time difference gets scaled by lambda T1. Okay. If it starts at an interval of delta T1, it reaches the observer at an interval of delta T naught, which is different from delta T1. Okay. It's scaled by this lambda. Okay. So this now can be translated into a statement about the frequency. Okay. So let's suppose that nu one, okay, is the frequency of light emitted at T1 B, and nu 0 is the frequency of the same light is observed at T naught A. Okay. Then it follows from this equation over here that the nu one will be proportional to 1 over delta T1, right? Because if you think of a period, right? Imagine that you have a light as a wave. Okay. So and imagine that delta T1 is the difference between two successive peaks. Okay, so that's delta T1 is the difference in time between two successive peaks, and this is similarly difference in time between two successive peaks, okay, that you observe. This is what is emitted. This is what you observe. Okay. So this is a period. Okay, so nu is the inverse of the period. Okay. So it tells us that 1 over nu naught is 1 over nu 1 times 1 over lambda T1, or nu naught is nu 1 times lambda T1. Okay. So this is the consequence. Now observation tells us that light from distant sources is redshifted. This means that the observed frequency is less than nu 1. So this means that lambda T1 is less than 1. Now lambda T naught is 1, right? Because that's the ratio of A of T naught over A of T naught. Okay. So lambda T1 less than 1 means that A of T1 is less than A of T naught. Okay. So the scale factor A of T, okay, is larger today than it was in the past. Okay. T1 was in the past. Remember, T1 is the time at which the light was emitted. Okay. So this is basically what is telling us, this redshift, okay, of light from distant sources is telling us that our universe is expanding, okay, because A of T naught is larger than A of T1. So the conclusion is that the universe is expanding. Is this clear?
So distant means how much distant? I mean, between the galaxies, or
Yeah, it's beyond the galaxies. But nearby galaxies have very little redshift. It's really much farther than the scale of the galaxies. If you want, for example, the distance scale over which the frequencies are doubled or are halved, or the wavelengths are doubled, that's of the order of 10 billion years, 10 billion light years. That's the distance scale.
okay.
Okay, so 10 billion light years is the scale over which the frequency changes by about 100%. Okay, that are it has a 50% of. So what you observe is half the frequency of what at which it was emitted. Okay, if the source was about 10 billion light years away. Is this okay?
Yeah.
Okay, now there is a hidden assumption here. Let me state that and then I'll stop. So hidden assumption is that the source and the observer are at rest in the TR theta phi coordinate system. And because it follows from the fact that we use the source to be at T1 B and T1 plus delta T1 B, right? We didn't change B. Similarly, the observer, we took it to be at T0 A and T0 plus delta T0 A, right? So we didn't change either A or B, okay, as we changed the time. Okay, and this is basically saying that the source is at rest in this coordinate system, and this is telling us that the observer is at rest in this coordinate system. Okay. So these are what are called co-moving objects. Okay. An object which is at rest in this coordinate system is called a co-moving object. Okay. And we'll see later, that on the average, the objects are at rest in the R theta phi, in the TR theta phi coordinate system. So this basically means that for the distant objects, right, when you are trying to look at the redshift, okay, as long as you average over many objects, you don't make an error. This, of course, cannot be true said for us, right, because we are only one system, right, and we have our motion in the universe. Okay? So we are not quite at rest in this co-moving frame, but we can figure out what our velocity is by looking at the lack of isotropy, for example. Okay, and we'll maybe discuss later how to do this. Okay? But this can be compensated. Okay, that our local motion can be compensated for, because we can determine what our velocity is in the co-moving frame. Okay? And using that, we can correct for it. Okay, so when you try to determine, for example, lambda of t, okay, by observation, okay, we can correct for our motion, and we can correct for the motion of the distant objects by simply averaging. Okay, I think the time is up, so I'll stop here and we'll continue this tomorrow. Are there questions?
Sir, is there a good definition of cosmic time? I mean, using the metric, we can see that, I mean, it takes the form of the metric, and we can say that T is the cosmic thing, but is there some other definition?
Not really, meaning that cosmic time is the time that defines the time slice, right? Because when you state homogeneity and isotropy, the spatial homogeneity and spatial isotropy, it has to be spatially homogeneous at a given time slice. So what is surprising is why there should exist such cosmic time, and this we'll try to explain later. Okay, what is the origin of this cosmic time? Why the universe has this property? But other than that, this you have to take as a definition of the cosmic time, right? That this is a time coordinate such that at a given time slice, the universe looks homogeneous and isotropic. Why this time there exists such a cosmic time, that we'll see later.
Okay.
Sir, in the conmoving frame, you are saying that under the time translation, the spatial coordinate remain fixed, but this time is a cosmic time, right? So that is very large. So how
No,
can the space?
it's not very large. It's time. This is a time coordinate, right?
Yeah.
So in this time coordinate, on the average, things remain at rest. See, right now we are not saying anything about t equal to t being large or not, right?
Yeah.
T is just a coordinate system,
Okay.
and in this coordinate system, the objects remain at rest. Right? Those are the co-moving objects. So when you're talking about large or small, you have to talk about the differences, right?
Yes.
And of course, in cosmology, we'll talk about time differences which are large.
Yes.
But time coordinate, of course, doesn't refer to that, right? Time coordinate is just this coordinate system.
Okay.
Any other question? Okay, so I'll then stop now and we'll meet tomorrow.